because I first went to Aussie in 1976, and you guys had the same problem then. Because Aussies like to spend money, they travel a lot, have a good life, and their personal debt was high. And then the Aussie real estate prices, it's a great place to live. I bought 2 properties in Aussie, one in King's Cross and one in Rushcutters Bay. And I made a lot of money because the inflation was just going high as a kite. But I don't think they ever stopped borrowing money. And so the reason I want to interview you today is because, excuse me, Aussie might be the canary in the coal mine. Because Aussie's economy and population is smaller, but it's very similar to America. Very, very similar. So you're saying there's a personal debt bubble. There is a real estate debt bubble, the same as the U.S. And now you have a nationwide debt bubble, right?
Yes. One of the points I'll make, Robert, is that when you look at if you look at the debt profile of American households before the GFC, a lot of poor people got into the real estate bubble when they couldn't actually afford to be in the real estate market. The big difference between America and Australia is the bulk of the household debt is actually with high income people as opposed to low income people. And some Australian commentators have said, well, there's no comparison between Australia and the United States because people who can service the mortgages actually have the bulk of the debt. Now, the problem with that argument is that our debt profile is very similar to what happened in Ireland. So middle income to high income people in Ireland before the global financial crisis had the bulk of the debt, and then when the GFC crashed, when the GFC occurred, the Irish economy basically went through the floor. So while we have a different debt distribution compared to America, whether it's America, Ireland, or Australia, we are in a situation that we can never return to. And the other thing I will say is that because you talked about the 1970s, so we did have obviously stagflation both in America and Australia in the 1970s. But if you look at personal debt levels, so the last time we had a household debt bubble in Australia was actually in the 1880s, and we had a depression in 1892, which was actually worse for Australia compared to the Great Depression. And our debt levels for households are substantially higher than where we were in the 1880s on a proportional basis.
Well, one more question, because another one of my really favorite countries is Kiwiland, New Zealand, and the Great All Blacks. How does New Zealand's economy compare to Ireland and to Aussie? That they probably do have a very similar situation where they do have elevated levels of household debt, and they do have high house prices. But I would say that their situation is nowhere near as extreme as where we are here in Australia. So do they have a problem? Sure, but is it as bad as where we are here in down under? Probably not. And a lot of Americans are running to New Zealand to hide. Have you heard that?
Yes. Over the last few years, I've heard a range of stories of Americans losing confidence in the American government, in the American legal system, in the American economy, and a whole bunch of Americans want to escape. So New Zealand is definitely one of those locations where a lot of Americans have fled to. But the other interesting thing I should say, Robert, is that I've also heard a lot of Americans going down to South America, particularly in Chile, and no doubt if you go down to the southern parts of Chile, you'll find a few expat communities being, they're developing and they're growing, so that could be potentially another area where Americans may find refuge.
So would you, I'm not kidding you, I love Aussie, I just really, really do. Would you suggest Americans run there?
The thing is, look, so probably what I would say is that there are some advantages, I think, living in Australia compared to the United States, but also I think there are some disadvantages as well. So I would say that the cost of living situation here in Australia is perhaps more pronounced than what it is in America. But on the other hand, while I think we have some corruption issues here in Australia, I don't think they're anywhere as close as to what the Americans have.
Yeah, and for those who may not know, Australia really is like the promised land to me. It's, you have great medical, everything's great as long as you don't make your money there, because your government wants to take it all the time.
I mean that's probably another thing I would point out. Our tax rates are much higher than where the taxes are in terms of the United States as well.
Okay, so you're an economist for Good as Gold Australia. What does Good as Gold Australia do?
Yes, as Good as Gold Australia. So we've basically been in business since about 2012. We're a retail dealership. So we basically we provide to the market gold, silver, platinum, and a whole host of retail denominations. We do storage, we do insurance, So I mean, particularly as we continue to see money printing, central banks around the world get out of control. I mean, the owners of the business thought that it was time to help more Australians, and we have a growing international client base as well. Help more people escape the fiat currency system and get into gold and silver. Obviously, I've listened to you on multiple interviews, Robert, and I know that this journey for you started. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it when you went to Vietnam or before Vietnam that you started buying silver?
I started buying silver in '64 when I was 17 because of Gresham's Law. Gresham's Law says when bad money enters the system, good money goes into hiding. So when I was 17 in 1964, they started debasing our dimes and quarters and half dollars. So there was a copper tinge around it. And I didn't know anything, but Gresham's Law does apply, because immediately I didn't trust my dimes, quarters, and half dollars. And I started going to the bank and turning in dollars, paper dollars, and getting rolls of dimes, quarters, and half dollars. And I'd pull out the real silver. And I'd put the copper silver back in there. And then I'd go back to the bank and kept trading. The trouble was that I went to school in New York at 17, 18, and my mother spent my money. So it kind of made my point that poor people don't know good money from bad money. That's the biggest problem. My mom and dad had no idea why I was running back and forth to the bank as this kid, high school kid, turning in fake paper money, getting rolls of dimes, quarters, and half dollars, and pulling out the real silver and trading in. And my mother says, well, I spent it while you're in school. I'm going, and I think we're talking about why there's so many poor people, is they don't know good money from fake money. And I'm going to have one more question to you, that I'm excited about. Here in America, you have the Perth Mint, and we've heard that there's a shortage of silver in Perth. I don't know if that's true or not. Where do you go then? Gold, silver, or crypto, Bitcoin, or Ethereum, or whatever they got today?
If you think in the classical Austrian school, so Ludwig von Mises about what is inflation? Inflation is the expansion of the money supply. So to have deflation, what that means is the money supply will shrink. And the only way in the current context that's going to happen is that the debt is going to shrink. And how are you going to shrink the debt? You have to have a series of defaults. Now, every time we've had a point of crisis since 2008, the central banks and the national governments around the world continue to print and spend to stop the debt bubble from imploding. And so far that has been successful. So whether you think about the sovereign debt crisis of 2012, or for example, the repo crisis in New York in 2019, or COVID-19 2020, or even if you look at the end of February 2021 in terms of how the bond market, particularly in the United States, but it's starting to spread to Australia, Japan, and Germany. Every time there's some sort of systemic risk coming to the fore, they try to print and spend and provide liquidity so that you don't have that sort of situation from occurring. We're going to see more of an inflationary situation moving forward compared to in terms of deflation. And I know we're about to get into this conversation about gold, silver, and crypto, but what I would say to your audience is portfolio allocation changes so dramatically compared to if you believe deflation's coming, your portfolio allocation will be dramatically different. compared to if you believe they were going to have some sort of inflationary outcome. And before investors start to think about, well, how do I allocate my capital? You really have to get the macro picture right. Obviously I've been studying economics for more than 20 years, but I know a lot of people who do believe in the inflationary scenario, and there are some people who believe in the inflationary scenario. So I think that investors need to really get their head around, what have the central banks and the government's been doing since 2008, and do we see any prospect of any changes moving forward?